amidst sun-gilded seashore, salt-washed breeze, and the occasional cacophony of seagulls. A weathered old man drags an equally old and worn dory up and onto a lonely rock in the middle of the cove. He's been looking forward to this moment all day. A chance to get away from everyone and everything. To lose himself in the soothing breath of the tide, as well as his stories. These are stories from the rock. Hi everyone, and welcome to our 4th episode of Stories from the Rock. For this episode, we have a bit of a Nightmare Before Christmas vibe going on, in that rather than a holiday-themed tale, as one might expect, we have instead an action-packed monster story that's so large it had to be divided into 2 parts for the sake of this podcast. It's titled The Shaolin Banshee, and while on the surface it may seem like it isn't a Newfoundland story, being more culturally rich than others you'll likely encounter on this podcast, the one rule of Stories from the Rock is that our stories contain an element of Newfoundland and Labrador culture, be that with theme, setting, or characters. This story is written by me, T.C. Bursey, and if I can indulge in a stereotypical self-promotion that writers are known for, it's actually one of the most fun stories I've ever had the pleasure of penning down, and one that has received a bit of fanfare, not too much, within an online writing community called Writing Battle. Now, I'm not sponsored by Writing Battle, though I low-key wish that I was, but I can't sing their praises loud enough. It's a Canadian-led global writing community where writers compete in a peer-judged Swiss-style tourney based on 3 randomly generated writing prompts written on fun tarot cards. In fact, many authors have jump-started their literary careers by winning such tourneys, or otherwise gaining renown for their works on the platform. In particular, it's a great space for writers to hone their craft as well, as every writer who reads your work has to provide helpful feedback, making it not just a peer-judged writing group, but a peer support mentorship of sorts. It was in this online space that I first published this story, The Shaolin Banshee, a story that earned me both an honorable mention on Writing Battle, as well as some excellent advice on how to improve my writing. Enough of that. Let's dive in to the first half of The Shaolin Banshee by T.C. Bursey. Trigger warning, does contain violence and gore. It was cold among the oaks, but Lyra's blood ran hot. A burst of foggy breath punctuated each rapid collision between her clawed gloves and the rotting faces of her targets as she mowed her way through the screaming tangle of Jiangshi. Watch their center lines. Let their weight do the work for you. Let them burst like waves upon the shore, came her teacher's voice in Lyra's mind, seemingly delivered on the wind. Yes, Sifu. When the last quivering skull slid from the reddened blades of her right glove, Lyra Jacqueline MacLeod let out a long, shuddering breath that was quickly engulfed in a northern gust. First, Lyra's nostrils widened as her battle-maddened mind sought to learn what was on the wind. Next to widen were her pupils as the evenly diluted sense of rot, bile, and rust slammed cortisol into her bloodstream. She cursed. There shouldn't be that many on this side of the loch. Mum's final text said that they had evacuated east to Castle Coffin when the rising first spread to Scotland. This forest should be free of both the living and the Jiangshi. Lyra sighed and flung the blood from the steel of her claws. Come then. I've only just begun to break a sweat. Almost in response, the first of the new screaming Jiangshi, bald and hulking, burst from the tree line. Hopping more than running, the creature screamed a garbled battle cry as it lunged at Lyra, only the most primal and savage parts of its mind left intact. Gleaming in the pale light of the sickle moon, Lyra's dark purple hair splayed out in all directions as she extended her claws and twirled. Time appeared to slow as the leading edge of her blades entered the throat of the Jiangshi as though it were made of pudding, its momentum driving the blades deeper into the rotten flesh until its entire neck burst open in a mist of crimson gore. 1. As the severed head of the Jiangshi bounced against the leaf-littered forest floor, time shot forward like a bullet from a gun. The second Jiangshi, eyeless and withered, emerged from the northeast shadows. Lyra extended her right arm outward like a feeler, while widening her stance and sliding the claws of her left hand into the sharpening sheaths that she'd expertly crafted into her armor, just below the elbow. A self-invented technique that not only supported the weight of her outstretched right arm, but kept Lyra's blades honed to deadly edges. The second Jiangshi bellowed before Lyra blurred both of her gloves into the creature's gaping maw. Smiling, Lyra bent forward while simultaneously flinging her arms outward, shredding away the perforated flesh that she had formed between the upper and lower jaws of her target. Where the cranium of the Jiangshi had been, there was now a small pulsing fountain of red, framed within a jagged fence of yellow teeth. 2. The third, a hag-like Jiangshi that looked older than most, barreled toward her, but then seemed to melt like butter into the surrounding shadows. As though the hag had summoned it, a lazy stone-gray cloud eclipsed the soft light of the moon. The screaming abruptly stopped, and the forest fell silent. A yin Jiangshi? Impossible! How can there be primary Jiangshi this far from Henan province? Exhaling, Lyra switched her stance from right to left, slithering her right glove blades into their appropriate sheaths as she closed her pale blue eyes. Breathe. Feel. Wait. The nanosecond she felt the Jiangshi's flesh press against her feeler blade, Lyra knew that she'd won. Strike! Skewering the Jiangshi with her claws, she thrust her arm all the way forward, plunged the sharpened fingertips of her left glove deep into the acrid flesh at the base of its throat, and seized a firm grip around its collarbone. Lyra yanked her right blades free and coolly thrust them downward into the eyes of her target, severing the Jiangshi's brainstem and turning what remained of its frontal lobe to jelly. The deep darkness vanished with a rush of cold air as the yin Jiangshi twitched, wheezed, and fell limp to the ground before Lyra's black boots. 3, Lyra said aloud. The cloud's private business with the sickle moon now settled, it drifted past to bathe the forest in meager moonlight once again. Another strong north wind tossed Lyra's hair, and she inhaled deeply. The scent of Jiangshi remains. None of this makes any sense. It's been 6 years since the rising began in China, 6 blood-soaked years to finally come home. And yet, it's as if the Jiangshi have been chasing me. How can death match the pace of life? Lyra, came a voice on the tail of the breeze. A chill ran down her, and she whipped her head toward the sound. Sifu? Ahead in the oaken path, the wind once more howled against her skin. My Wing Chun prodigy, my artisan of flesh and bone, my Lyra, it whispered. I see, so I've finally gone insane. Huffing, she turned south toward sanity, until the voice whispered her name once more, and all desire of preserving her mental health evaporated. "Sifu, I'm coming!" Lyra cried into the night, hurtling herself down the moonlit path. "Lyra," the voice urged as she bolted. "Faster." She channeled her ki to the meat of her legs and leapt high into the branches of the oaks, moving through the trees at the inhuman speed she had been trained to accomplish through the ancient secret art of ki manipulation. "Sifu, I'm here! Where are you?" "Lyra," whispered the enigmatic silken voice. The trees thinned, forcing Lyra back to the leaf-strewn forest floor, where she took exactly 3 strides before an impossible force looped around her right ankle, whisked her high into the October air, and slammed her against the ancient trunk of a large and gnarled oak. "Ow!" In her swaying vision, Lyra thought she could see her little sister's upside-down face. "Emma?" asked Lyra, before her world faded to black. Lyra was still in the throes of her recurring nightmare. "Emma, I'm sorry. I had no choice. You turned." "Wake up!" the zombified voice of her little sister screamed. "I'm sorry," Lyra screamed back. "I said wake up!" cried a different voice, just before Lyra registered the sharpness of a tiny but powerful slap. Lyra's eyes flew open, and she lunged her claws toward the face of the little upside-down girl in front of her, missing the girl's nose by mere millimeters with each swipe. "You're being pretty rude for someone I decided not to kill," said the girl in a lilting accent. Lyra's pounding heart slowed, and she took the girl in. Around 9 years, pale blonde hair and mismatched yellow and green eyes that seemed far too innocent for her actions. Lyra also quickly ascertained that she was the one who was upside down. "If you promise not to hurt me, I'll cut you down," she said. Lyra sighed hard and nodded. The girl produced a small knife seemingly from nowhere and began sawing at the wire-like black nylon at Lyra's ankle. With the sudden whip, the line snapped, and Lyra thumped gracelessly to the gnarled base of the oak, coughing. "You've been out for almost an hour. Trap cans told me I had something big. Was hoping for a deer. Instead, I caught an old lady. You'll do, though. Just kidding. My name's Squeak." Squeaked Squeak. "Lyra," coughed Lyra as she rose, found north, and sauntered off. "Hey, wait!" Squeak called after her, rushing to bridge their gap. "Go away," said Lyra flatly. "I saw you fighting the bog crawlers. You some kind of ninja?" "Go away," Lyra repeated. "You're aren't you? The one they called the Banshee." Lyra stopped short and briefly glared at Squeak before returning to the path. "I never asked for that name." "Why not? It's so cool. Wherever you go, death follows. Just like the Irish stories me mother used to tell. Father never cared much for stories. He was a Newfoundlander born and bred just like me, so all he ever cared about was beer, boats, and fried bologna. Where is it you said you was from?" "I didn't," said Lyra. "You looks like you're from here, but you acts like you're from some east country, like Beijing or Tokyo." "Those aren't nations. Those are cities in China and Japan." "You sure knows a lot for an old lady." Lyra bristled. "I'm 26. Squeak raised an eyebrow above her yellow eye. "Yeah, like I said, an old lady." Lyra opened her mouth to chirp back, but something ahead of them snagged her tongue. "What is it?" asked Squeak, her mismatched eyes aglow with worry. "Get behind me, Squeak." "What? No way! I'm fighting with ya!" Squeak protested, mimicking Lyra's stance as well as her serious expression. Lyra sighed and looked upwards to a nearby towering oak. She returned her gaze to Squeak and smiled. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Squeak squealed as Lyra scooped her up, flipped her atop her shoulder, and concentrated her ki into her legs. This is going to blow her cheeky little mind. The leaves at Lyra's feet jostled and then burst away in a perfect ring as Lyra launched herself into the air, front-flipping perfectly at the zenith of the great leap to come to a graceful perch atop the thickest and highest branch of the oak. Squeak still clung on stiffly as Lyra forced the girl's small frame from her shoulder and then planted her like a brazen flower against the crook of the tree's trunk. "Stay," said Lyra, before backflipping into the night and landing in a low crouch, senses cocked toward north. "There's something here, and it's not just the Jiangshi." "That was so cool!" Squeak yelled from the treetops. "Quiet!" yelled Lyra, just before the voice on the wind manifested. "I see that my kitten has grown a pair of claws. Remarkable craftsmanship. Not only are your fingers clawed, but your fists feature, well, I don't know what. Is it the Baknach of India, or perhaps the Tekokage claws of Japan? It does not matter. They cannot save you," the voice taunted, melting into the whispering wind. "Sifu." Stepping into the moonlight, Lyra's former master revealed herself wearing magnificent flowing black and silver robes, her corner-kissed eyes aglow with unnatural vitality. "Hello, Lyra. It seems that we've finally caught up with you. You've led us on quite the merry chase." Lyra was dumbstruck. "Sifu, you're young again. This doesn't make any sense?" "It does, Lyra. Your mind knows, but your heart refuses to accept it. Shall I demonstrate on your new friend, the one who looks so much like the sister I made you kill?" "Sifu, no, please!" Heedless, Sifu raised her ivory hands toward Squeak's tree. As if pulled by gravity, the girl's spindly body ripped through the night and collided throat first into Sifu's grip. "Lyra!" Squeak's brief scream was silenced by a loud, wet pop as Sifu broke her neck, sucking at air as if trying to feed on the girl's fleeing spirit. Lyra howled in grief, and Squeak's novel Jiangshi form slithered from its master's grasp, hissing. "It was you! You started all this! You killed them all! You killed everyone I've ever loved! Except yourself!" Lyra screamed in her mind. "Does my foolish former student have any questions before I finally add her key to my own?" "Only one," Lyra managed between heavy teeth, her gaze not leaving the mismatched eyes of the primary Jiangshi that had once been Squeak. "Ask it," shrugged the monster. "Can you still feel pain?" A clean breeze wafted through the oaken branches from the south, stoking the pointed flames of Lyra's fury. "I haven't experienced pain in over 300 years, Sifu said. Lyra's now smoldering eyes lashed upwards against her target. "You will." Lyra thundered key into her legs and ignited it. A deafening crack tore open the night, blowing leaves from the surrounding trees as Lyra careened towards her former master like an arrow loosed from a bow, claws first. "Pathetic," Sifu hissed, before bursting into countless tendrils of wind-blown shadow. When the very tip of Lyra's steel kissed the ancient oak bark where Sifu had been, Lyra instantly reversed the flow and direction of her ki. The once proud tree went from biology to physics in a blink of an eye in a shower of superheated splinters as Lyra poured her life force forward like cannon fire, using the backblow of the explosion for abrupt deacceleration. She covertly snatched a handful of splinters in her left palm as she twirled herself to a graceful stop atop the smoldering stump she had created. and as the confused uppermost half of the oak crashed to the forest floor, Lyra screamed, rage-laced keening like the banshee she had become. "Wo Tao!" Sifu's disembodied voice cursed. "I retract my hasty criticism. I am very proud of you, Lyra. Your ki has grown immensely these past 6 years, even more than I had predicted it would. It's no small wonder these Gui Lao call you the Banshee. Your power has made you a true monster." "The only monster I see here is you!" Lyra cried into the shadows as she adopted a defensive one-legged stance atop the steaming stump, siphoning the ki from the open wound of the tree the way she had been taught, steam weaving around her like white ribbons swept along in the wake of drawn ki. Lyra's former teacher laughed then, a grating and splitting sound that had mutated far from the pealing musical laughter that Lyra had once loved to hear. "Can you see me, Lyra? The shadows I've spun from yin obscure both myself and your new friend, Squeak. Her name was Squeak, from view. And by now, you've noticed that my ki is so vast that its source is indistinguishable from this graveyard forest, from the eastern shadows. Am I over here, Lyra? From the western darkness. Perhaps I am over here. Or am I right here, Lyra? Whispered a harsh, graveled version of a lilting voice that could only belong to Squeak, directly into Lyra's right ear. Startled, Lyra spun and swiped her claws on pure instinct, but Squeak had already merged with the surrounding blackness, leaving a trail of mocking, childish giggles in her wake. Swallowing a lump of grief, Lyra closed her eyes, opened her ears, and flung the oaken splinters in a wide fan, peppering the unnatural shroud of darkness that her master had summoned. As if the air stiffened to molasses, the world slowed once more, and Lyra's mind hyper-focused on the sound of wooden fragments colliding with the environment, glowing white against the black velvet of her mind like an improvised form of sonar. A tree, another, a rock, a doomed owl in flight, and... Lyra kicked against the wiry stump at her boots, backflipped high into the air, and brought her claws to her chest to tighten her spin. The soles of her boots gently touched against Squeak's tree before the bark burst away in the shape of 2 footprints, and Lyra once more sliced through the night, downward into the inky shadows like an assassin's dagger, and her long, armored fingers closed around the slender neck of her target. "Found you," teased Lyra, grinning at the glowing eyes of her former master, eyes that had widened to saucers in disbelief. "No, it doesn't die yet. I promised it pain." Before Sifu could recover from the shock, Lyra hawked back a hard globule of phlegm and spat it into the sublimely beautiful face of the creature in her grasp. "You're no Sifu of mine, you dirty, twisted bitch!" sneered Lyra, her Scottish accent rearing up truly for the first time in years. "How dare you?" Lyra clapped her left leather-covered palm over the mouth of the tiresome creature. "Had your waist," she snapped, before closing her pale blue eyes and emitting a series of harmless ki bursts directly into her former master's head, using her sputum as ultrasound gel to peer deeper into the corrupted depths of its bastardized meridian system. Lyra smiled. "I see. So that's how you..." The blow came faster and harder than anything even Lyra had ever thought possible. The yin Jiangshi that had once been Squeak sprang up and out from Lyra's shattered ribcage like a tiny undead acrobat, leaving a baseball-sized dent in the thin metal-plated leather armor along her left flank. Before Lyra could register her alarming and rapidly reddening wound, Sifu's wrist snapped upwards against her right elbow, bending the joint backwards with a sickening pop. Lyra inhaled to scream, but the Queen Jiangshi deprived her of even that catharsis with an impossibly quick palm chop to her trachea, and proceeded to knock Lyra to the ground with a single savage backhand slap. Lyra's world swam. The pain was unimaginable. "Loathsome Hundan!" Sifu shrieked as she swiped the mucus from her moon-white face and weaponized her startling gaze against Lyra. "Treacherous, malignant half-breed! How dare you dishonor me? How dare you peer into my Jinglo in such a barbaric manner as that? You who has the audacity to emancipate yourself from me? Me who found you and your brat sister mewing like helpless strays after your drunken lech of a father abandoned you? He who was shamed to see how guailao you both truly appeared. It comes at no surprise that your father wouldn't dishonor himself by letting his ill-begotten whelps take the proud name of Ng. You and Emma both are from the filthy stock of disrespectful Western swine. You will not speak her name," Lyra managed, gagging at the taste of her own blood, rising shakily to her feet and employing what she'd learned from her scans to seal away her own devastating pain. "If you can do it, so can I." "Enough of this. It's time I took away your key, as well as what little honor you possess. You think you're the one who invented how to turn ki into sound. I'll show you what a true master of ki can do," decreed Sifu, as she closed her glowing calligraphy eyes, slowly raised her hands skyward, and began to thrum the autumn air like an oscillating drum. Next to vibrate was the ground beneath Lyra's black boots, faint but growing more powerful by the second. "She's summoning them." Like a dark homing beacon, shadows pulsed outward from the Queen Jiangshi in waves so strong that they jostled the oaks. The trembling of the leaf-littered ground became a quake, and a dark realization came upon Lyra like ice-cold water. She's summoning all of them. Alarmed, Lyra growled as she channeled white-hot yang ki to her now streaming and steaming broken ribs, healing them awkwardly but instantly. She took a deep, icy breath and forced her breathing to steady while her heart continued to pound with raw adrenaline. A northern wind rushed hard against Lyra's ears, and she instantly regretted her deep breathing as the putrid, overwhelming scent of Jiangshi assaulted her olfactory nerves. Lyra gagged, and her vision began whirling to a blur born from sensory overload and panic. "Think, there's no way you can fight off that many Jiangshi, not in your current condition, and not when your senses are being overwhelmed. There has to be a way. Think while your mind can still focus. Think while you can..." But she couldn't think anymore. Her whole life, Lyra had experienced sensory-related moments of overwhelm, times when sights, smells, tastes, textures, and sounds were so powerful and overwhelming that they completely banished her ability to think of anything but the relentless tide of discomfort. Sifu had taught her how to use her heightened sensory awareness to her advantage through the art of kung fu, but if anything, she had since honed her autistic senses to become even more sensitive than they were before her training had begun. And now, in the throes of another profound sensory meltdown, her mind could not but scream. Her mind harrowed, and her body soon followed suit. Again and again Lyra screamed into the night, smacking at her ear with one clawed glove and holding her nose with the next, overwhelmed by an unavoidable maelstrom of sound, smell, and terror. And then something new happened. Less of a thought and more of an instinct burst into bloom within Lyra's reeling mind, like a moon lily amidst a thunderstorm. Despite her aversion to the stench, Lyra acquiesced to her body's counterintuitive demand to inhale as deeply as her 9-stone frame could muster. As she sucked in the heavy putrid air, Lyra became more and more aware that she wasn't just inhaling the crisp autumn breeze of Scotland, but something else. She tentatively opened her eyes and beheld countless white ribbons of steam threading through the night and into her lungs from the splintered and scorched remains of more than 50 surrounding oaks. Long after her lungs were filled to capacity with air, Lyra kept inhaling the harvested ki of the forest until it gave her such a profound, full sensation that it lingered at the back of her teeth. "Impossible," Sifu whispered in a silence that hung like a child at the gallows, blessed but short-lived. And then the Banshee unleashed her true keening. An impossible twist of black and white ki had instantaneously burst forth from Lyra's wide-open jaws like the roaring fiery breath of a dragon 100 times her size. The sheer omnipotent boom of wild sound and life force rattled Lyra's teeth, bones, and sinew to near sunders as the sound mercifully popped away to a steady din of tinnitus. Her jaw felt loosened as her mouth finally snapped shut, and the keening winked out of existence in an almost anticlimactic stutter. Lyra collapsed on all fours and gasped as she filled her burning lungs with desperate gulps, her mind rushing to process everything that had occurred in the span of 30 pulse-smashing seconds. "What in the greasy airborne was that, Lyra?" she thought to herself, on the cusp of both fainting and dissolving into mad laughter. The world before her had become a cloud of dark, murky debris that was almost invisible in the thickened darkness. Her mental composure and capacity rushed an important thought to her mind. "My eardrums are punctured. I have to heal." Lyra heard a steady hiss overlap her tinnitus as steam billowed from her bleeding ears and her eardrums began to knit together from the encouragement of healing yang qi. As the dust, leaves, and debris cleared from her vision and Lyra's hearing slowly returned, the Queen Jiangshi finally came into view, or what was left of her. Where once there stood an almost obscenely beautiful and elegant young Chinese woman in a flowing black and silver pao-fu robe, there now stood a skinless, writhing horror, liquefied eyes like horrendous soft-boiled eggs cascaded down blackened, raw cheekbones, the exposed tendons and boiled strips of skin hanging in tatters from an entire skeleton's worth of eroded, exposed bone. It then warbled briefly before coughing forth a gout of steaming blood and speaking. "To think that you are not just a master of Shaolin Kung Fu and an artisan of ki manipulation," the grotesque creature began, sounding to Lyra like nothing less than an underwater demon made manifest, "but are now confirmed to be something far greater, something that was thought only to arise once every 1,000 years, a ki sorcerer, a Wu like me. You certainly are a never-ending wellspring
of surprises, Lyra Jacqueline MacLeod, unlikely heir to the power of the bloodline. Lyra rose and gave her target the most intense stare of hatred she had ever mustered. How do you know these things? How do you ken so much and keep so many secrets? In the 10 years I've known you, you never once told me your name. Who are you, really? The creature laughed as a fountain of white mist billowed forth from her body and just as quickly blew away in the northern wind, revealing the Queen Jiangshi in all her former unmarred glory. Really, my finest prodigy, I thought you'd have figured it out by now. I am the former teacher of Ip Man, Bruce Lee, and countless other Wing Chun prodigies throughout 3 centuries of time. I am the Shaolin nun turned Wu sorcerer who defied not just every Sifu I have ever trained under, but the clutches of death itself. I am not just a master of Wing Chun Kung Fu. I am the inventor of Wing Chun Kung Fu. Your 13 times great-grandmother. No, I am Eng Mu herself. Scene break. Squeak was cold. Squeak was tired. Above all, Squeak was alone in a vast and inky darkness, and she was afraid. I'm dead. I knows I am. The oldest lady broke me neck in her stinking grasp, so she did, and yet I'm also alive. I can feel myself moving around like a friggin' savage, me bones like iron rods and me skin as hard as a St. John's hangover. Something, no, that thing has got me spirit snagged up like a squid on a jigger. I can feel others here too. I feel father. I feel mother. I feel a girl as young as me who feels a lot like... The invisible line embedded in Squeak's chest snapped taut, catapulting her through the air just like the moment before her death. She came to a violent, abrupt stop, and her mouth began to move. Or am I right here, Lyra? Squeak was compelled to say. The voice she heard somehow echoed and garbled as if underwater, though it manifested as a giggle on the other side of the veil. Squeak screamed. And that is part 1 of the Shaolin Banshee. As I had mentioned before, on the surface it might not seem like a story that's from Newfoundland and Labrador. But not only am I from Newfoundland and Labrador, and I wrote it, I try to weave an element of Newfoundland and Labrador culture in just about everything that I write. And for the most part, people let me get away with it. Likewise, I try to weave a bit of neurodiversity into my works as well. But I digress. As mentioned, this was a story from Writing Battle, which is an incredibly great platform for any writer who's just starting out, or more seasoned writers as well. It's also, in my humble opinion, a really great online writing community. Thanks for tuning in. And next episode, episode 5, we will be continuing this story and perhaps starting another one. We'll see. Until then, thanks for listening. Join us next Friday for more stories from the Rock.